had just finished stuffing the last of my stuff into a bag when my mom shouted, "Elle, come on, time to go." Throwing my backpack over my shoulder, I slid down the railing of the stairs one last time. I was used to moving, but I really liked this house. My dad was standing at the door of the house. He gave me that look, the look he always gave me when we moved, that apologetic look. I could tell he felt bad, but he didn't have to make my mom and I move just because he needed to be closer to his clients for a few months. He could just travel back and forth. Before I continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to let us know if you want more insane stories like this one. I got into the car and immediately put my earbuds in. Moving always put me in a bad mood. We were going to be in the car for a few hours, so I decided to just take a nap. I was trying to fall asleep when I heard my mom and dad talking. My dad said, "I feel bad. Elle being so lonely is my fault." He then raised his voice, and looking into the rear view mirror, asked me, "Elle, are you awake?" To which I responded with a sleepy grunt. "This is our last move. I promise." I jolted awake and sat up energetically. "Really?" I asked him. He nodded, and I couldn't help tearing up. I started imagining finally having a solid group of friends. Since we moved so often, I never bothered to make friends. That way I wouldn't get hurt when we eventually left, but now it was different. We stopped at a small hotel by the highway a few hours later. This trip was going to take around 4 days. My mom and I decided to drive to the nearest town and get something for dinner, while Dad stayed behind and took a shower. While we were shopping in the local supermarket, my phone buzzed. I figured it was my dad, but it was a message on social media. I opened it and discovered it was from a boy, and a cute one too. He said he always saw me eating alone at my old school and wanted to talk to me, but that I suddenly disappeared, so he never had the chance. I asked him a bunch of questions to make sure he was real. I even asked him to send me a picture of our school yearbook. I had never seen him before, but I kept to myself, so maybe I just missed him in the crowd of people I avoided. My mom told me to hurry up with the shopping cart, so I slid my phone into my pocket and hurried over to her. My dad went to bed earlier than my mom and I that night because he was tired from driving. My mom stayed up watching a movie on her laptop, and I stayed up talking to Max, the boy who texted me. We talked about why I moved around so much, about school and teachers we hated. He was very funny, and although our conversations were just friendly, I like to think he meant whatever he said with flirty undertones, because I know I did. I talked to Max whenever I could during the road trip. It felt kind of weird, but I had a crush on him. I felt like I could tell him anything, really, and he made having left our last home even more sad. My first day of school at the new school was really scary. The school was twice as big as my old school, which was already huge. I felt like I could get lost, but then I remembered I could make connections with people now because I was going to finish high school there in 2 years. Plenty of time to make loads of friends. I asked a girl who looked just about my age for directions and headed to class. I talked to loads of people during and in between class. They were excited that there was a new girl, and I was excited to get to know all of them. I couldn't stop smiling all day because I was finally not alone. During lunch, I sat at a table at the cafeteria and people sat around me, asking me about myself and introducing themselves. The girl I had asked for directions earlier sat next to me and asked me, "Do you have a boyfriend?" I didn't really know what to say because I wanted them to think I was cool, but I didn't want to lie to them. I eventually did lie. I said that Max was my boyfriend, but he lived back home. I showed them pictures of him and all, and I could tell they were impressed, but I felt kind of guilty lying like that. Later that day, I was unpacking boxes in my room when my phone buzzed. My stomach filled with butterflies when I saw it was Max. He was asking me how my first day of school went. I told him everything, about how I always had a crowd around me and made tons of friends. He wrote, "Wow, you're already replacing me?" with a sad face emoji next to it. I chuckled at how cute he was, and then realized I should probably tell him what I said about him. I bit my nails in nervousness when I saw that he left my message on seen after I told him that I had said he was my boyfriend. I tried to take my mind off of him the rest of the day, because hours later, he still hadn't replied. I worked on some schoolwork, baked a pie, unpacked my entire wardrobe, and organized my messy bookshelf, trying to work off the nerves. But I still had an uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. What if he thought I was a weirdo and never wanted to talk to me again? Around a week passed and Max still had not texted me. I sent him a couple messages because I was worried I had ruined our friendship. At school, I barely thought about him because I was always distracted. But the second I got home and had free time, he was suddenly all I could think about. I was sitting in the cafeteria with some friends, just talking, when a friend sitting across from me looked behind me and smiled. I was about to turn around when someone's hand covered my eyes. "Guess who?" said a boy's voice. I took his hands off my eyes, and when I turned around, it was Max. I couldn't believe it. I immediately jumped and wrapped my arms around his neck. I realized I was tearing up a bit, so I hid my face on his shoulder. When I let go, I slapped his shoulder playfully and began scolding him for not texting me back. He said he got permission from the principal to visit the school for a day, so we spent the day at school together. I couldn't help just staring at him whenever he talked. I had never even heard his voice before, and any feelings I had for him grew tenfold. After school, we decided to walk home. I was nervous to spend time with him alone, but he held my hand to calm me down. I asked him, "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" To which he replied, "I wanted to surprise you." He went quiet a second, and then continued, "I wanted to ask you to be my girlfriend in person, since it's more romantic and all." My heart simply melted. I wrapped my arms around his neck again and hugged him. We got home 10 minutes later. I was super excited to introduce Max to my parents. "Mom, Dad," I said, "this is Max, my boyfriend." My dad and Max shook hands first. Then he shook hands more softly with my mom. "If it's not a problem for you, Mr. and Mrs. Wilkerson, I'd like to take your daughter out on a date today," Max said. I heard my mom stifle back a squeal of excitement, but Dad gave him a disapproving look. Mom elbowed him, after which Dad said, "Yes, no problem, young man." Mom smiled brightly and pulled me upstairs. She must have made me try on a dozen outfits and 5 hairstyles. She finally made me slip on a dress and curled my hair slightly. She put mascara and lip gloss on me. "I just want your first date to be perfect," she said. I managed to escape my mom's clutches and headed back downstairs, but I wanted to hear the awkward conversation between my dad and my boyfriend. As I tiptoed closer, I heard it much less awkward than I expected. "So has your rate gone up, boy?" I heard my dad say, which Max denied. "What rate?" What was my dad paying Max for? I walked in and they both turned to look at me, Max looking guilty. "What rate?" I asked Max specifically, but my dad jumped in saying, "He's gonna mow the lawn for us while he's here, and I asked him to pluck the dandelions too." Max simply nodded, but I noticed he wouldn't look me in the eyes. My dad could fool anyone with how good he was at lying. Everyone except me. I had a feeling he and Max were hiding something from me, but I let it go for the time being. Max took me to a cute little ice cream parlor where we sat, talking for hours. He was funny and charming, so of course my stomach was all butterflies when he talked. I felt comfortable around him. I didn't feel self-conscious if I snorted between laughs, or if I had some ice cream on my chin. He would just laugh and snort back or wipe the ice cream off my chin. We finished our ice cream pretty quickly, so we stood up and went for seconds. I got lemon, and to my surprise, he got peanut butter. I watched him order his ice cream, and when we sat down, he started eating it. "How's your ice cream?" I asked him. "It's great," he replied with a bright smile. "I should call an ambulance or something, though, shouldn't I? Before you pass out?" I asked him. He looked at me like I had just told a joke he didn't understand. "You know, since you're allergic to peanuts," I explained. His eyes grew wide. "You told me you're very allergic to peanuts, so how come you're eating peanut butter ice cream?" I asked him. I put my cup of ice cream down and crossed my arms. Max seemed to deflate. He looked down in shame, before spilling all his secrets to me. He showed me the conversations on his phone, the transactions and the voicemails. I was shocked and hurt. I closed my eyes to keep tears from streaming down my face, but it was in vain. I shot Max an icy glare. He looked desperate and worried. "But I want to get to know you," he said, reaching for my hand, but I moved it away and stormed off. I slammed the door open when I got home and went straight to my dad's office. "How could you?" I shouted at him. "You're sick! I can't believe you did that to me!" I was offended and I felt invaded. While I thought I was texting a cute boy my age, I was actually texting my own father? His face fell when he registered what I was shouting. "Elle," he began, but I cut him off, saying, "No, you don't get to make excuses. You invaded my privacy. You tricked me and Max. You hired an actor to pose as my boyfriend? What made you think that was okay? It's messed up." My mom then walked into the room because she heard the noise. I told her what he had done, and it was reassuring to see that she was just as shocked and disgusted as I was. Dad frantically tried to explain to my mom and I why he would do such a thing, but nothing he said could make it better. I mean, he paid a boy to use his picture and then pose as my boyfriend? Am I crazy to think that's messed up? I avoided him around the house for months, until the day he left. He kept his promise. We wouldn't move again, but he did. As he drove away from our house, I stood with my mom at the front door of our house. My mom wiped a tear from her cheek and asked me, "Will you ever forgive your father, darling?" To which I replied, "Of course. I know he didn't mean to hurt me." My mom sniffled and walked into the house. I was about to do the same when I heard a familiar voice behind me say, "Elle." I turned around and saw Max standing there with a bouquet of beautiful flowers. We stood there for a second, just looking at each other. I hadn't seen him in months. I had almost forgotten what he looked like, because he was only really in my life for half a day. "Elle, I'm sorry," he said, to which I replied that it wasn't his fault. I meant what I said at that ice cream place. I do want to get to know you. Everything I learned about you is amazing. Please, just give me a chance. He gave me the bouquet of flowers. It was as big as my entire upper body. I looked at him and couldn't help smiling. I asked him, "Want to go for some peanut butter ice cream?" And we walked hand in hand, taking turns carrying the enormous bouquet that I didn't want out of my sight just yet.